In filmmaking, learning is a constant process. It is something that you engage in every single stage or every single milestone that you want to think of in your journey as a filmmaker. And for every filmmaker, all of us at every single point of our lives begin our journey as filmmakers as a fan of a film, a fan of a filmmaker, a fan of an actor, a fan of a location, a fan of all the components that make up a film. So for that reason, one of the things that we know for a fact is that this curiosity that we start to question in the area of filmmaking, that I want to do this, I want to do that, actually begins to become the very first elements of your foundation into the journey of filmmaking. So today I'm going to speak about the feature film. So a feature film, just by its own description, is a narrative film. It is a film that has a running time long enough to be considered the sole or principal presentation in a commercial entertainment program. Now, many feature films run between 75 minutes and 210 minutes, but the description varies across the globe. For instance, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in the US, the American Film Institute, and BAFTA, the British Film Institute, describe a feature film as one that runs for about 40 minutes. But the Screen Actors Guild, on the other hand, describe a feature film as one that runs for 80 minutes or longer. All the same, the majority of feature films will run between 70 and 210 minutes. And if we look at the history of this particular art form, it began as small clips that were placed, for instance, within an advert or within a news program. And just to break the monotony of that particular production, there'd be an element of a small fiction film that would be played during that particular break. So if we go back to 1906, when we see the very first feature film across the globe, the story of the Kelly Gang, being the first really major element that we can describe as a feature film. In 1909, in France, we have the second feature film called Les Miserables in French. And generally now, this particular art form taking more and more center space across the world. Normally for children, feature films that we've seen for children, Frozen, and many other titles that I can think of offhand, run between 70 and 105 minutes. And in Africa, one of the things that I will say very clearly is that this is one particular genre of filmmaking that we've been able to absorb and absorbed very critically. And we have become a very important producer and also a marketplace for feature films that are created across the globe. So that said, I now want to talk about the elements of a feature film. What would make a feature film? So of course, the most important thing and the most critical thing is a feature is a story well told. It is a work of fiction. It is work that a filmmaker gets into to create a certain world, create a certain viewpoint, create a certain reality, create, most importantly, a worldview in which all of us can be able to partake. And it has 8 very important core elements. Of course, the most important thing is a good story, but not just a good story well told. The first element of this story is what we refer to as the plot. And the plot here is the sequence of events in this story, which one is able to follow throughout this particular film. Some of us might actually decide to call the plot a storyline. What is the story that you're telling? Most importantly, this story, what sort of structure does it take? So every plot, every storyline has 5 very important elements. Number 1 is the introduction, or what we call the exposition. What is the worldview of this story? Where does this story evolve? What is it that we want to say really early in this story as we set the pace for us being able to unfold every single event that happens in this story? Now, once this story is introduced, we have what is referred to as the rising action. Here now we begin to see the story begin to take more shape. We begin to see the introduction of many other elements that make the story move from that particular sequence where we were introduced to now begin to tell the story in more detail. It is at this point that we bring in the elements of conflict. Every single story must have conflict. Conflict here being the element that now allows the story to coalesce or allow the story to grow beyond the introduction and what is referred to as the rising action. So we now move into the conflict and how this area of conflict needs to be resolved for us to be able to move the story forward. Of course, the elements of conflict have to be built very, very significantly to allow the audience, most importantly, to be able to follow through on every single element that is put in place to resolve the conflict, because the conflict cannot continue to be unattended. It must be resolved. So we have the climax or the action turning point where now this conflict is either resolved or very significant efforts have been put in place to see how best to deal with the conflict, which can go which way. It can go any which way. It is resolved totally. It is left not totally resolved in what we're referring to maybe sometimes in filmmaking as a cliffhanger. And that most importantly, there is a learning. Throughout this entire process, all we're looking for is the process of learning more than anything else. So once the conflict is beginning to be resolved, then we start to see a downward trend in terms of the story. The story now is actually nearing its conclusion in what we refer to as the resolution, or in some cases, the denouement, very specifically. A typical feature story will have a script that is between 95 to 125 pages in terms of length. Currently, some scripts do not run longer than 110 pages. And it depends on the genre of filmmaking that you're getting into in terms of a feature. For instance, if you're doing a feature that is very heavy on comedy, then of course the script will be much shorter. If you're doing a drama, the script also will be slightly longer, much longer. The screenplay, the script that we write to be able to get into a feature, is something that must be gotten into with a lot of dexterity and a lot of seriousness. It is a very long process. It is a very involving process. It is a balance of many of the key components that are required to be able to tell a great story. Now, almost every story that we write is different, but one thing remains constant. Many screenwriters decide to follow the process of what is referred to as the 3-act structure, which actually develops the screenplay into 3 distinct parts: the setup, the midpoint, and the resolution. Once we have that in mind, then we are able to get into the story writing process relatively easy. Every story begins with an idea, the story idea. It could be a personal preference that you have. It could be something that you have observed. It could be an interest that you have in human behavior. It is something that you want to explore about human experience. So this story idea is something that must be fresh. It must be one that is captivating. It must be one that is engaging. It must be one that explores the vast universe of what we refer to as human experience. It must be told creatively, and it must be spurred by both imagination and curiosity as you begin to tell the story of human endeavor. In terms of the characters that we put in the story, the individuals, the men, women, children, one of the things that we know is that we are now transforming an idea that we have from page to screen. So these characters must be believable. They must be human beings. We must create human beings that live and breathe both on paper and on the screen. They must have traits, they must have features and motivations. And through characterization in a story, then we basically allow the story to come to life. The story must be told through characters. Most importantly, as we plan to get into the production process of a feature film, then we want to be sure, more than anything else, we have a story that is well told. A story who the different scenes and the different sequences have a logical flow in being able to carry the story from the beginning to its actual conclusion. So what does it mean? It means we must also invest very significantly in the 3 production processes. In the pre-production processes, where we have the story idea that we develop, the story idea that we script, the story idea that we keep thinking about how to refine, we want to be sure that at that particular process, we are very clear about the story that we want to tell. We want to be sure that as we write the script, we are writing a script that we know for a fact can actually be translated into a film. In terms of all the details for the screen, we are very, very clear about what it is that we're looking to do, and that our script is not something that any actor or any person that coming across that particular script will actually be grappling with. It should be very straightforward what the story is. In terms of our casting, as we look for our characters, people that we want to actually be able to tell this story now on screen, we want to be guided very clearly in choosing actors that will fulfill these roles, but in a meaningful way. That will fulfill these roles in a manner that allows them to be believable throughout the story writing process. So as we audition, as we do screen tests, as we call callbacks, we are always driven first and foremost and always by the interest of the story. So what do we need to do as we cast? We need to have very thorough knowledge, for instance, of the acting scene in the country. Who are the established actors? Who are the new and existing actors? Most importantly, we need to have really good taste in being able to discover new talent, people that we know for a fact can feature in our films for the first time and actually make a break in the industry in this particular area. So as we begin our production process, that we know for a fact that every single individual that we need to work with has been put on board really early. I cannot overemphasize the issue of reading through the script, having read-throughs through the script between the writer, the director, and the remaining part of the bulk of the crew, to allow every single person to know what it is that you actually want to be able to get into. It also includes the issue of us being able to lock the locations. Where do we want to shoot these films? Where do we want to shoot this story? What would work best? Okay. So it also involves the issue of really being sure about where it is that we want every single sequence or scene in this film to be shot. It includes also, like I said earlier, locking your crew and your cast. Who do you want to work with in terms of your technical crew? I think for me, my first advice always would be, considering that we're not really working on very big budget feature films in this country, my advice always would be like to look for the most minimalist approach that we can in terms of getting crew, so that we are able to manage our costs, manage the cost of the entire production, manage the costs of anything related to remuneration for the crew and cast, and that the work is done well. It includes the issue of equipment. What we have seen clearly over the years is that equipment is getting smaller, it's getting compact. Maybe some of the more bulky equipment that we were using earlier is no longer applicable. In many cases, some formats are no longer in use. So the idea is to look for equipment that actually works for you, works for your budget, but more so equipment that is going to give you quality and standard. And of course, that you have a crew that knows how to use the equipment. That is really, really important. But even as we do all that, the other thing that we need to do as filmmakers, we want to be filmmakers that are ethical. So apply for your feature film license in time. Apply for any authorization you need from county level administration. If you have to negotiate, for instance, to use public land or public facilities, make sure that you have the appropriate authorization to allow you during the time that you're shooting to focus on the shooting alone and not anything else. That you're able to work with speed and efficiency, knowing that you have the correct authorization to be able to shoot your film. And most importantly, if you're going to work, for instance, with minors and young people who require authorization and permission and consent from their parents, those are things that you must take into account. You want to make sure that before you get into the production process, anything related to the planning for your production, to enable your production to roll out in the time that is required and with the efficiency that is required, then you want to be sure you have taken care of any single planning process in this regard. A key thing that you must always remember as you get into your feature film is, who is your target audience, or rather, who is your intended audience? And we're talking very specifically about the kind of, if you like, the kind of place that you would like your film to be screened. Who do you have in mind as people that would be interested in the kind of product that you are producing? Who are those who are most likely to watch your production or to want to watch it? Of course, these are things that you must remember are driven by very specific things. Things like age, gender, where are they located? Are they rural? Are they urban? What are their interests as they watch your film? So the production process is the actual filming of the film. You're actually filming, you're on location, you're now recording picture, images, you're recording sound, your crew is on set, your equipment is on set, your talent or your actors are also on set. All the necessary props are on location, and you are now going through the process of being able to capture the footage that is required to be able to tell the story. So any elements you're thinking about at this particular time, things like motion graphics, animation, any elements of special effects, all this material is produced during the production stage. One of the things that you must remember throughout the time that you are shooting your feature is you must always remember the issue of quality. Quality in a production can never be overemphasized. Quality is something that you must look out for every single moment. You have quality picture, you have pristine sound. Those are very, very crucial in any filmmaking process. You cannot correct any mistakes that you have done during production in the post-production phase. They are not correctable. There is nothing you can correct. So you want to make sure that during the time that you are actually recording on set, on location, that the images you have, the sound that you have collected is of the best possible quality. Anything related to retakes, if you're not sure about the quality of any of the images or sound, is done during the production phase. It's a very tiring phase because it's one where everything that you have planned for comes into being. So you want to make sure that even as before you go on set, you go through the process of blocking every single element of acting in your film. Any camera angle, any camera position, all those things must be thought of very clearly during the time that you're doing blocking. And most importantly, that you have the right attitude as a crew, the right attitude as a cast to be able to take through this process of production. Like I've said earlier, it's a very involving process, but one in which I can assure you, if every single detail has been thought about, every single detail has been planned for, every single person has been communicated to correctly, and everyone knows what is required from them, the teamwork and the ethics required for you to be able to pull this production become relatively easier during the production phase. But the last stage is what we refer to as the post-production. Here now we are organizing the footage we have actually recorded from set. We are cutting, we are coloring, we are editing the footage captured during the production. Most importantly, we are looking at any redundancies or any elements that we recorded on location, and we do not need them for any particular purpose. So we're looking at really core footage that we're going to use, or we're going to piece together to be able to tell this story. We're removing shots that do not work for us. We're removing shots that, for instance, did not turn out in the manner that we thought they should turn out. We are looking at sound takes that, for instance, maybe did not work as they should during the time that we're recording. We're looking at elements of acting that, for instance, maybe were not really captivating for us to be able to pull together a certain point in that story. So we are organizing all the footage and every element of audio that we collected for purposes of being able to tell the story significantly. At this point, you're working also with an editor who's required to be a person with a lot of creativity, a person who has a lot of planning as to understanding, first and foremost, the first thing they must do is to understand the script itself. The script must be availed for them. Some of the special instructions that were collected on set also should be shared with them. They should have an edit guide that has been availed by the director, but the director himself or herself also should be part of the post-production process to be able to piece this story, marry all the elements of picture and sound to be able to tell the story. The other very important element for us to also have during the time that we are doing post-production is some of the footage that has been collected on set as what is referred to as behind the scenes, which actually shows a lot of the processes that went on prior to the shooting of the film. That everyone who had a specific role is captured doing the different elements of the work they are required to do in terms of planning for the production. Even as the production starts itself, this person is actually capturing all the things, all the requirements and the rehearsals, for instance, if you like, that are in place long before you go on location in that particular regard. Now, of course, as the post-production process is going on, one of the things that you're doing also is looking at the whole issue of audio. How are you dealing with the audio that has been recorded on set? How is it being mixed? How are we laying it on the timeline? Most importantly, what do we need to do finally by way of mastering it and making sure that in terms of the sound design, we actually have a production that meets the qualities that are required across the globe in terms of sound quality or audio quality. Technology has made it very easy for us to be able to get into this genre of filmmaking, even going as far back as the script writing stage. Right now, a lot of the script writing can actually be done using specific software programs. For me, I think the one that I would consider to be the best overall in terms of a script writing software is one referred to as Final Draft. It's very popular in many parts of the developed world. The other one that I would also call in my own mind, and also a really solid script writing software, is one called Movie Magic. For those of us that are just beginning, but really a Mac-based script writing software, I think the one called Highland actually works really, really well. The best script writing software, for instance, if you're writing in a collaborative effort. Sometimes you have script writers come together to write, but in a collaborative effort. I would think the one that works best is one called the Writer Duet. That one works really well, especially if it's a collaborative effort. But the one that I still consider best for production, I think throughout most of my working life, is one that is called CeltX, or CeltX, if you like. That one has been able to make the script writing process much, much easier in many regards. I think another key feature of your feature film venture, something that you must really think about very critically, is the whole issue of the budget. And I think here I want to dissuade the notion that feature films have huge budgets. I know feature film projects that have been done in this country, award-winning for that matter, but have been done really purely as passion projects, where the filmmaker or filmmakers come together and sometimes even begin to do this production using nothing else but just their own personal savings. A lot of the contributions, a lot of the things that they are able to put in place for this production are productions that are supported by colleagues and friends in kind, in terms of many aspects related to the cost of cast and crew allowances, in terms of location costs. So it is possible to really work in a very innovative and a very improvised manner to be able to arrive at your feature film. It does not have to cost hundreds of millions of shillings. But we know for a fact that it's also possible to seek for some sort of collaborative efforts with some of the organizations in this country that support the production of film, including feature films. I think the Kenya Film Commission and its empowerment program is very specific about feature film being one of the elements that they support using their empowerment program in the area of production. Suffice it to say that one of the things that you must think about in your feature is the very crucial elements that allow you to be able to get into this particular production. So all the above the line cost, things that we talk about in terms of directors' fees, producers' fees, are things that actually you should be able to discount for purposes of getting your film actually get into the production process. There will be a time and a place where you will be able to have garnered enough by way of resources to be able to pay yourself in terms of those fees. But in the meantime, the very crucial cost that you must think about always, first, second, and last, are issues related to the planning process for your production, both the pre-production and post-production processes. So elements like actors' fees, elements like costume and makeup in terms of locations that you must hire or acquire. If, for instance, you have to pay for a certain facility to be able to shoot, then that is money that you have upfront. That you also have money for the crew and cast allowances, you have money for catering, you have a budget for transportation for your cast and crew, and most importantly, that you also have, in the event that you do not have your own, that you also have a facility for post-production that you can actually pay for. In the final analysis, a feature is one genre of filmmaking that you must really think about before you really get into, as with all other genres. But I think for the feature film, you have to invest more time into the planning process and more time into the story that you want to feature in this particular genre. That since it is a work of fiction, it must be one that must capture the whole universe in terms of human experience, human undertaking, and that most importantly, in every single thing that you do in this particular venture, that you're driven by the story idea that allows you to deliver an engaging and a very inspiring story that actually engages your audience, because audience for us as filmmakers is key.